Please be seated. The court is now back in session. The floor is once again given to the prosecution to continue putting questions to this witness. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, Your Honours. Good afternoon, Dr. Hun Chun Lee. Just before the break, we were discussing a meeting that you attended at the then civilian hospital in Battambang, and you described the appointment of a janitor, and you testified that the meeting was presided over by Kek Pen, alias Mitsu. Just to get this fact for the record, do you recall what position in the Khmer Rouge structure Mitsu held at that time?
During the Khmer Rouge regime, Kek Pen was the original name of Comrade Su. He was the chairman of Sector 4.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you a few more questions about the conditions in Battambang and events between the 17th of April and the 25th of April, when you said the city was evacuated. And I might, by way of follow-up, also look at some of the issues you've already mentioned. You told my colleague, or you described for my colleague, the disappearance of the 13 military health staff from what was then the Battambang Military Hospital. I want to just, by way of clarifying your sources of knowledge, look at one part of your book. And this is at Khmer ERN 00678-768 and English 00369-688. And what you described there, Dr. Chun Lee, is a conversation you had with your mother, where she related to you how she had spoken to the mother of one of the 13 people who had been executed. And this lady had, according to your book, said that she had gone and seen her son's body. Can I confirm that is a correct statement, that you were informed in these terms by your mother?
On the 21st April 1975 at 5 a.m., the Khmer Rouge made an announcement to gather all the 13 senior military health personnel. They were put onto a vehicle, they were transported out, and later on they were shot dead. That's what I cannot forget. And as for my mother, she kept reminding me so often, because she usually went to the pagoda on the religious holiday every week, and usually she would meet with old ladies who came from the Khmer Rouge control zone. They said that the Khmer Rouge forced their children to join the armed force. They took away their rights, and they would kill anyone they considered traitors. And they advised us to leave the country if we could, but we didn't take the word. And of course, sometimes I felt a bit shameful, as in fact my mother was more intelligent than me, and I should listen to her words. As for the woman who wants to see the dead body of her son, she tried to be strong. When she wants to see the dead body of her son, that's according to what my mother told me. She then went to the dead body of her son, put the incense and prayed for the soul of her son, and then she returned.
Thank you. Now, these 13 health staff in the military hospital, did you know those people?
They were all my colleagues.
And forgive me if I'm asking you an obvious question, but did you ever see any of those 13 individuals ever again after their disappearance?
They were all shot dead in the rice field. It was in Omal commune opposite the agricultural department. I only met some of the wives of those people who survived, and some are living here and some are living overseas.
So just to ensure that I have those facts correct, those 13 individuals who were taken away, according to what you heard, you never saw those people again?
That is correct. They gone.
Thank you. Another matter which I wished to touch upon, and we will do this briefly, you discussed the disappearance of an individual whose name was Siu Heng, who you said was a relative of Noon Chia's. And I'll read a brief passage from your book. This is at Khmer ERN 00678758 to 59, and English 00369-682. You said the following: we heard that in Wat Kor commune next to Battambang town, the Khmer Rouge soldiers collected into a military truck Mr. Siu Heng, who lay hemiplegic at home, and drove him away on the national road Battambang-Pailin. And a little bit further down, Siu Heng was a former senior prominent member of the resistance against French rule in the year 1940s who cooperated with Lao Min. After the 1954 Geneva Conference, which ended the war in Indochina, Siu Heng surrendered to King Norodom Sihanouk and served the army, the Royal Army, as colonel. We had no doubt about Siu Heng and his son's fate because the Khmer Rouge always considered as traitors those who left their rank of the revolution. Can I ask you first, how did you know that Siu Heng had taken a position as a colonel in the Royal Army before 1975?
As an intellectual, I knew of the event. Mr. Siu Heng was an all-hand resistant, and after the Geneva Conference, he lobbied Prince Sihanouk and he was promoted to become a colonel. I knew his wife as well. In fact, Siu Heng's wife was the younger sister of Nuon Chia's wife.
Thank you. Now, we will come back to what core commune in a bit more detail later. Now, while we're discussing that time period of 17 to 25th of April 1975, I wanted to ask you about one passage in particular in your book, and this is in a chapter that precedes the evacuation, and the Khmer ERN for this is 00678-768, English 00369-688. And you said the following, I'm reading only an excerpt. We, government officials, intellectuals, perhaps had high education, but were stupid and were cheated by the socialist ideology and the Khmer Rouge propaganda. We had hoped to contribute to the reconstruction of the country under the leadership of new politicians we believed to be progressive and clean intellectuals. Can I ask you to expand a little bit on that passage, and particularly why did you feel cheated by the Khmer Rouge in that period, in those days preceding the evacuation, and perhaps during and following the evacuation?
At that time, some Cambodian people, particularly the youth, had a strong belief in Khieu Samphan, Hu Nam, and Hu Jun, as they were considered clean people. So I did not believe whatever truth that my mother told me. So later on, I became so disappointed of what happened.
I will move on then to the evacuation itself, and you've already described aspects of the evacuation, and I wish to just go into a bit more detail. This is at Khmer ERN 00678-769 and English 00369-689. It's in Chapter 2 of your book, which is entitled Exodus. You said, describing the morning of the April the 25th, and I quote, Khmer Rouge soldiers in black uniform with krama, in brackets Khmer scarf, banded around their heads, were firing in the air everywhere in the city. Others were marching furiously back and forth on the sidewalk in front of the houses and yelling in loudspeakers, "Get out of the house, get out of the house." Can I ask you first, is this something you witnessed with your own eyes on the 25th of April?
President, witness, please wait till the microphone is operational. Witness, in Battambang, the evacuation took place 1 week after the Khmer Rouge took control and defeated Colonial soldiers. And what happened during the evacuation? I witnessed it personally. The soldiers threatened us by all means, including jailing and shooting into the air, and by the announcement through loudspeakers to chase people to get out of the house.
I'm just going to pause here for a moment and ask you, when you said earlier that your mother and other people had perhaps suggested that you should fear the incoming Khmer Rouge forces, if you can say very, very briefly, what were some of the things that people had heard? What was the reason that your mother had feared the arrival of the Khmer Rouge?
Because at that time the Colonial soldiers had been defeated subsequently and successively. Some people actually moved to Thailand in order to cross to Thailand, and another group moved to Phai in order to cross to Thailand as well. But I refused to do so, and I wanted to work and to serve the country with the progressive and clean people.
Thank you. So returning now to the events that you were witnessing on the 25th of April, as the Khmer Rouge soldiers were going around town and forcing people or ordering people to leave, was any reason given for why you had to leave the city?
We heard about the reason 2 or 3 days earlier. We heard that people had to be evacuated so that they can engage in the rice production at the countryside.
At that time, in April 1975, was there a particular food shortage in the city of Battambang? Was there a lack of food, or perhaps was there a lack of medicine in the city that might have warranted a removal of the population?
We all brought along the food, rice, sugar, and the fish paste. Because it was 1 week after the Khmerus took control that the evacuation started.
Thank you. My question was probably not very clear. At that time in April, and if you can recall the situation in the city before the evacuation, was there a shortage of food? Was there a famine in Battambang?
I personally did not experience the food shortage.
As the city was being evacuated, what happened to the hospitals in the city of Battambang?
When people were evacuated from Battambang, all the patients left the hospital, and the hospital itself was empty, and there were also no health staff there.
From what you observed, were any exceptions allowed? For example, for elderly people or for those who were sick? Could those people stay in the city given their medical condition?
No. Because at that time, the hospital staff also had left, so there was no hope for any patients to remain in the hospital.
And just returning to the issue of reasons for the evacuation, you told me that you heard 2 days or so prior to the 25th of April that the city might be evacuated so that people would be taken to fields to engage in production. Did the soldiers who were forcing people out of the city, did those soldiers give you any reason as to why you had to leave?
We heard from other people before the evacuations that we had to leave to work in the fields to contribute in the production.
Do I understand correctly that the soldiers gave you no explanation on the 25th of April?
President, witness, please respond, but you need to make sure you respond after the microphone is operational. Witness. During the evacuation, they did not make any announcement. The only thing we heard was the yelling, the threatening voice, and the gunshots.
Do you recall what the population of the city of Battambang was in April 1975? In other words, how many people lived in the city?
Frankly speaking, I did not know the number of the population.
Thank you. We'll move on then to your relocation to Damre Slap village, which you also discuss in your book. And this is generally discussed in chapter 3 of your book. I wish to ask you first about the new authority structure that you describe. And this is at ERN's Khmer 00678-774 and English 00369-693. And you describe there that you were told that you were living in Damre Slap village, Preknarin commune, Duntev district, or district number 43, region 4 northwest zone. Could you describe for the court what you observed in terms of the authority structure, the new authority structure that was established at village, commune, district, etc. levels?
Response. I wrote in the book already that the Khmer Rouge structure was categorized into communes and first and second chiefs of the commune. But there was no office as yet. They made use of the house of villagers as the commune office and village office. And for the district, it was far from my location. I never seen it. And after district level, there was no provincial level. It was sector and then followed by the zone. So during the Khmer Rouge, there was no term such as province. And for the district, they would put number for the district. For example, Don Tiêu district or district 43, or the zone, for example, the northwest zone.
And just focusing in a little bit on the various authority structures, you describe in your book on the same page that I've mentioned the establishment of groups that you describe as security guards or spies or chlop. Could you describe very briefly what the role of those groups was?
Response. The village chief also had militias, and these militia or chlop were recruited from the very poor peasants who were very determined and brave, those who would be asked to kill people without hesitation, or who could kill people without hesitation. And there were also some undercover militias, for example, teenagers who would be asked to work as these positions, and also at night they would sneak under our beds to spy on us.
Again, on that same page, you describe the village committee, and you give some names of people that were on the village and commune committee. But I just want to clarify one thing. You say each village chief had one chief. I apologize, I'll rephrase. Each village committee had one chief who was Khmer Rouge and two deputies selected from among villagers called old people or base people. Is that accurate? Is that an accurate summary of what you saw at the time, that members of the village committees were old or base people?
Response. Yes, it is.
And that leads me on to a topic that you also discuss in this section, which is the new classifications that you encountered. And you describe a division of people into 17 April people and old or base people. Can I ask you first, if you know, what was the purpose of that classification of people into these two groups?
Response. In my own opinion, I believe that the classification was a kind of intention of discrimination by the Khmer Rouge, not by the Cambodian people in general. And even in the village, people were classified into the poor peasants, the very poor peasants, and the poorest peasants. And for the new people, they were classified into new people and another subcategory. And for this category of people, the Khmer Rouge did not like them, in particular those who have fair complexion. People, Khmer Rouge believe that these people were those who never exposed to the sunlight.
Now, Dr. Hun Lee, I wish to ask you a little bit about the new rules or policies that you observed and recorded in your book. Now, before I ask you this question, let me just say this. We will not be discussing the conditions of life in the cooperatives because this trial is primarily concerned with the authority structures, policies and forced movements. So I will not ask you about life in the cooperatives extensively. I wish to ask you a couple of questions perhaps about the new rules that you describe in your book, and see if you can expand on those for us. This is at page, or rather at ERN in Khmer, 00678-777, and at English ERN 00369-695. It's a slightly long passage, but if I can just point to some of the things that you discuss, that people force themselves to wear old or used clothes, that if you had those who had new clothes tried to make them old, that boots and sandals were thrown out, that most people walked barefoot, that women had their hair cut short, and you also say no one dared wear eyeglasses in order to avoid being noticed as intellectuals. Is that a correct summary of what you were witnessing immediately following the evacuation?
The President, please hold on. Mr. Witness, wait a moment. You may now proceed. Counsel, it is correct. People who had run out of the old clothes, they had to make use of their new clothes, have them dipped into the muds, and have them dried under the sun so that they look old. And for those who had new shoes, they would not dare wear them. And young women did not put on their makeup to look pretty at all.
What did you understand to be the reason for these rules to be put in place?
Response. My understanding is that whatever the Khmer Rouge had done was very negative. They did everything to destroy the country, to destroy or wipe out the country of its population. It was contradictory to what I anticipated or expected.
Why did people hide or not wear their eyeglasses to avoid being noticed as intellectuals? Perhaps I should rephrase this. Why did people hide or wish to hide their background as intellectuals, based on what you observed?
Response. The Khmer Rouge didn't like educated people. That's first and foremost. And for those who were wearing glasses were only intellectuals, those who were not very much liked by the Khmer Rouge. They referred intellectuals to their own with their own terms. They are mocking at intellectuals as those who had little intelligence, paradoxically. And people did not dare wear any glasses. Even I myself have to abandon my eyeglasses.
And just one or two questions on the new rules that you observed. At page or rather at ERN in Khmer 006787779 in Khmer, English 003699696, you describe the collecting of biographies, and you say the following: 3 days after the new settlement, the Khmer Rouge started to register all people living in each house, called, quote, collecting biographies, end quote. They recorded the name, sex, age and profession of each person. They told people to be honest with Angkar, not to lie, and to tell Angkar only the truth. Again, based on your observations, did you understand a purpose for the collection of these biographies?
The President, witness, please hold on. Counsel for Mr. Noon Chea, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was hesitating to interrupt earlier, but there's now been a whole string of questions where the witness is asked to speculate or to interpret the purpose of certain measures that the witness has no knowledge of other than what he himself has experienced. Asking the witness for the purpose of separating base people and new people, asking the witness to speculate why they hid their glasses. Those questions are interesting, but the witness should be asked about what he himself knows and what he experienced, and asking what the purpose was of undefined Khmer Rouge individuals that may have implemented those procedures is not proper. The witness could be asked about how he personally experienced those policies, but he should not be asked to speculate on the purpose.
The President, Counsel Angadam, you may now proceed. Counsel Angadam, in support of the request, or rather observation made by counsel for Mr. Noon Chea, I would like to remind the Chamber that on the 20th of May 2012, the trial chamber issued ruling that only the experts who are entitled to speculate, witness is not allowed to do that. That is my observation, Your Honours.
If I may respond, Mr. President. First of all, I'm certainly not asking the witness to speculate. I am asking the doctor to describe events that he himself witnessed. It is entirely proper to ask him what he understood, and I was careful in framing my questions. I'm not asking him to opine, as an expert might opine, on broad policies. I'm asking him simply about the events he saw and what he understood about those events. One might say one of the distinctions between a human being and a robot is that a human being is able to observe, understand, and comment on information that they are seeing. My learned friend is effectively inviting you to restrict the witness's testimony to a robotic recitation of simply the things, of actual things that was said to him or that he saw with his own eyes, as though a human being is not capable of observing events around them and describing those events. So I invite Your Honours to overrule the objection. The questions are well within the witness's knowledge. They are based on his own experience, and he should be allowed to answer them.
Counsel Angadam, the President, Counsel Angadam, You are not permitted to reply to the co-prosecutor because the rule is precisely clear that you are not allowed to do that. The President, the Chamber rules that the objection by counsel concerning the line of questioning by the prosecutor to this witness is not sustained. The question is relevant to the experience by the witness who may express what he had lived through the regime. And please also be reminded that Counsel Angadam, you may be you may misunderstood about the ruling by the trial chamber. Indeed, the experts are not permitted to speculate before the chamber. None or no one who is called or summoned to appear before the chamber is allowed to speculate. This is not the venue for speculation. Witnesses are allowed to make his or her conclusion, but not pure speculation. Please be reminded of this.
Thank you, Your Honours. I'll rephrase my question. In relation to the biographies, Dr. Hun Chun Lee, who did you submit your biography to?
Response. Allow me to respond to this question. And again, my response will not be based on any speculation. It will rely heavily on the truth. I had been living through the Khmer Rouge regime for almost 4 years to be able to tell you the truth. The biographies were taken when Khmer Rouge would select a leader of the group to take the biographies of people at every village. Our names, occupations, ages would be some of the key items to be included in each of the biographies. For me, I did not say that I used to be a military medic. I said I used to be a physician at Battambang Province Hospital, because at Battambang everyone knew me that I was a civilian doctor or physician than a military medic. I had been working as a civilian physician for a long time before I was assigned and given a position as a military medic.
Do you know what the Khmer Rouge did with those biographies? Again, based on what you observed and experienced.
Response. I have no idea where these biographies could have been sent to or analyzed.
if I can repeat an earlier question, who did you and your family submit your biographies to?
We submitted to the head of the group who came to take our biographies. After the biographies had been completed, we would then submit to them.
Thank you. Now, I wish to look at a meeting you attended in May 1975 at Kdangia Pagoda. I apologize if my pronunciation is incorrect. This is again in your book at Khmer ERN 006787789 and English ERN 003.
The President, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, please repeat the ERN number in slower pace so that it could be well rendered.
Thank you, Mr. President. Khmer ERN 006787789, English 003696996. In this section, Dr. Chunli, you're discussing a meeting in early May 1975, at which a long speech was given by Kek Pen, alias Mitsu, the individual we discussed earlier, the Sector 4 Secretary. One of the things that you state there from his speech relates to the Revolutionary Army, and it says the following: "Now, for the first time in our Cambodian history, under the guidance of our clairvoyant Angkar, the Cambodian Revolutionary Army, born out of the pure peasants class, had destroyed the capitalist and feudalist regimes and has liberated Cambodian people from the servants of the American imperialism." And then a little bit further down, you say, in relation to a plan by Angkar, the following: "This plan requires all of us to change ourselves, our body and our mind, into real peasants and to make great sacrifices, meaning sacrifice of private material property and private mental property." Can you tell us whether, in your experience, that final instruction was implemented and how it was implemented, the sacrificing of private material property and private mental property?
Response: During the meeting at Kdang Nghia Pagoda, Comrade Su said Angkar had the plan to convert the country into the checked board-like squares, so that it could be seen from the air that each paddy fields would be formed into these kind of checked board squares. And that secondly, he said that we were asked to sacrifice our personal ownership right. And at the same time, Su said Angkar did not need to waste 7 years for training doctors. Angkar trained doctors for 1 week, which is enough already. And that all doctors who were trained for the 7 days would be able to appear at work all across the country immediately. That's what I heard from Comrade Su during such meeting. And for the implementation, as you already learned that any kind of ownership right, the right of the ownership of property had been abandoned, but people did not wish to have them sacrificed easily. We were human beings. We couldn't live without all these rights entirely. And that it was impossible for the whole country paddy fields to be divided into the checked board like squares. And I couldn't see that it applied across the country. And again, it was also impossible that doctors could be trained for 1 week because the former doctors were executed when new doctors were recruited. But that I learned from Comrade Su, who said in the meeting that they did not need 7 years to train any doctor, but they would need only 1 week. And this is the policy employed by the Khmer Rouge to execute every Cambodian citizen.
ខ្ញុំថាសាក់សី
Council Sonarund, Mr. President, the witness should not make any personal presumption or conclusion. President, thank you. And witness your advice to limit your response to what has been asked of you. And please do not provide any of your subjective conclusion in this proceeding. Try to listen to the question, try to understand it, and limit your response to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Chunli, we will need to keep your responses brief if you could, simply for the reason that we have quite a lot of information to cover. Now, the next event that I wish to discuss very briefly is your transfer to Prek Lung Hospital. That event took place, I believe, or according to your book, in May 1975. Now, if I can just ask you first, very briefly, at Khmer ERN 00678-782 and English 00369-699, you discuss receiving a letter with the name of Mitsu and stamped Region or Sector 4 Committee, which invited you to work at the hospital. Is that correct, Dr. Chunli, that you received a letter from Mitsu requiring you to report to Prek Lung Hospital?
At that time, I was plowing the rice field, and I did that work for 1 month. And then I received a letter from Comrade Su inviting me to work at the Prek Luang Hospital. Actually, it was a former colleague, and then it turned into a hospital.
Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time at all on the hospital. The purpose of my questions is really only, again, to ascertain authority structure and just aspects of policy applicable. Can I ask you first, who was in charge of that hospital, Prek Luang?
At Prek Luang Hospital, the chairman was a female. She was about 25 years old, but I cannot recall her name.
Was she a medical practitioner? Was she a trained doctor?
I did not know her past history, so I cannot tell you.
Thank you. Now, you only stayed at this hospital, according to your book, until July 1975. But in that period, again, according to the book, you visited Mong Rasay district with an arts troupe. I wish to just clarify one point. You told my colleague earlier that you spoke to a man who had driven one of the buses which took away Lon Nol officials and military officers. In this section of your book, you refer to a person, and I just want to clarify that is the person that you were talking about. This is at Khmer ERN 00678-789 and English 00369-705. You mention a former teacher at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Phnom Penh named Chan. Was this the person who told you about that he had driven a truck, one of the buses, carrying Lon Nol officials and military officers to their execution?
At that time, while I was working at the Prek Luang Hospital, one day myself and a few other medical staff were instructed to go to Mong Rasay in order to follow up on the arts group, whose chief of the group was the child of Comrade Su. It was at Chirei village in Mong Rasay. And as for the person by the name of Jan, Jan was a former teacher of fine arts. And the person used to live in Battambang province. And she was one of the person was one of the people in the arts group. Our vehicle stopped at Chirei Pagoda. Jan, who was the teacher of fine arts, and myself walked to Mong Rasay together. and we met a driver who was sitting on a large piece of rock. At that time, we could smell the stink of dead bodies. And as he kind of understood our feeling, he told us that there were dead bodies around and they were not properly buried. And he continued to say that he was one of the drivers who took the senior military officials and the lunar officers to be killed at Tapadai Mountain.
Thank you for clarifying the identity of that person. Now, just before we leave Prek Long Hospital, you described something you observed in June 1975, and this is at Khmer ERN 00678-793 and English 00369-707. You state that since June 1975, the water level of Sankhe River constantly rose. Every day, people saw streaming down the river torn mattresses, pillows, and swollen, naked corpses floating belly down and on their backs. And a little bit further down, you say, the floating dead bodies showed that the Khmer Rouge had started killing those people. Can I just ask you, did you personally observe those bodies, those floating bodies that you're describing in that passage?
In June 1975, the villagers and myself witnessed this event. Flowing along the river were mattresses, pillows, and dead corpses of male and female. There were no dead cattle, but dead human beings, and the corpses were flown toward Ton Le Sap direction. Nobody actually dared ask what happened or why there were corpses floating along the river. Everyone at the time only minded own business, although we were so concerned.
Thank you. And now we will move on to the next hospital where you worked, which is the former military hospital in Battambang. In other words, the hospital which you had worked in prior to April 1975. And you state in your book at the end of chapter 4 that you were assigned to this hospital by an individual called Mit Hun, who was a member of the committee of Sector 3. Now, could you describe for us the management of the hospital itself, if you recall? Who were the people in charge of the hospital when you arrived there?
After I had worked at the Prek Long Hospital for 2 months, I received a letter with the name of Comrade Hun requesting me to work at the military hospital. Which was known as P2 Hospital. And Comrade Hun, who made that request was the younger in-law of Ruhnyam alias Kau alias Mulsambat, who was the chief of the zone.
I may have missed your response, your last part of your response. Could you repeat, if you have already indicated, who was the director of the hospital, P2?
P2 hospital had a chairman and 2 deputies. And that P2 hospital was a military hospital. As for the civilian hospital, it was known as a P1 hospital. The structure was the same. There was a chairman and 2 deputies. Both hospitals were under the control of Comrade Hun, who was the deputy of Sector 3 committee, and he was also the younger brother-in-law. President, thank you, the prosecutor. The time is now appropriate for a short break. We will take a 20-minute break and return at 3 p.m. Court officer, could you assist the witness during the break and have him returned when the court resumes at 3 p.m.?
សូមជើញក្រោកឈរ